Long before Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, climate change has had significant impact on global food security and food inflation. From severe drought in the Horn of Africa to torrential rain, hurricane, and flood in Asia to volcanoes, earthquakes, and wildfire in the Americas and Europe. The Russia war on Ukraine was just the last straw that broke the global food basket camel's back, further exacerbating what was already unbearable and unaffordable high food prices for many people around the world, particularly in Africa, where government and nation reliance on imported food products and grain, such as Ukrainian grain, literally brought some leaders to their knees, pleading for food mercy to feed their population. While there has never been a shortage of poverty and food security talk among world leaders at global summits, as well as potential funding to address the twin global food insecurity and poverty, which are always top priorities of the global development agenda, the results have remained anemic, to say the least. Which begs the question, what are we missing or ignoring in our quest to address food insecurity? And could the solution be hidden in plain sight? Recently, I spoke with a leading food and agriculture expert working on the front line of addressing this issue for answer. Thank you for joining us. We are the AIM for Climate Summit in DC. And you are the chief scientist for Food and Agriculture Organization, a United Nations agency. Talk to me about what you're doing in the global community and specifically in Africa.
So FAO, which is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, it's a technical agency of the UN that has existed for 76 years, and we are responsible for the whole sector of agriculture and food. So when we talk about agriculture and food, that covers everything related to the production systems. So it's plant production system, animal production systems, fisheries and aquaculture, forestry, biodiversity, climate change, and that how it relates to agri-food systems. So it's a very large mandate, and we have offices in about 130 countries across the globe, and we have 194 members. And those members are countries from the north and the south. Africa as a continent, it's a very high priority for us. And it is a high priority for us because unfortunately as a continent, it's a food insecure continent, whereas the potential is huge. So when we talk about Africa, we talk about Africa that has skipped in many ways the Green Revolution. So we hear about the Green Revolution in the Northern Hemisphere, we need about Green Revolution in India, for example, but not so much in Africa because our productivity per hectare and per drop is still very low. And because the uptake of technologies in Africa is still low. So the new narrative that we want to really push for Africa is that Africa has some of the few thousand of hectares that we can bring into production. Most of the other continents have already all agricultural arable land already used. Africa still holds some of the lands that hasn't been used. So there is a potential for really getting those areas to be productive. But the biggest potential is actually in increasing productivity in Africa. So Africa, in most of the grains, for example, have about 1.5 ton per hectare. You go in Europe and that exact grain will have about 9 to 10 ton per hectare. So the gap of productivity per hectare is huge. And the reason is the uptake of technologies and innovation. And that's why we say that Africa could easily multiply by 5 and 6 and 7 its productivity by adopting and scaling up technologies and innovation.
Speaking of technology and innovation, you mentioned grain, for example. There's a lot of indigenous grain pertaining to Africa that are not being used. One of it, I was speaking with one of the participants at this event, and they were talking about fonio, which is a grain common in Senegal. You know about
Absolutely,
that.
yeah.
And they're working with one of the renowned chefs, Pierre Tam, to bring it to the global market and also upscale the African cuisine. Why do you think that Africans and African government have overlooked some of this indigenous grain to produce to reduce the food insecurity on the continent?
I think the focus on the staple crops came mostly as an impact of globalization. So globalization went, and even the Green Revolution in many ways have really made us focus on only few species instead of broadening our food basket. And in that, Africa really lost the use of many of the local species. So what happens is that in many ways, we were waiting for the varieties to come from overseas. We did not breed our own species within the continent. We were waiting for centers or organizations like CIMMYT that does the breeding of maize and wheat to give us the materials so that we adopt it or make it adaptable to our local ecosystems. And with that, we have narrowed really, and we have not used many of the local species that now we are bringing back. And we are bringing them back for many reasons. One of the main reasons, they are much more nutritious. They tend to be much more high in terms of protein, amino acid, micronutrient. The second one, they are more adaptable to climate change. So they tend to use less water and to have more drought and salinity tolerance and heat tolerance. And the third reason is that in the old days, it used to cost about $100 million to breed one variety of, let's say, wheat or any grains. Today, with new technologies, particularly the gene editing, you could do it with $5 million. So the cost of breeding was too heavy for many of the national programs, and hence they relied much more on international breeding programs to bring them those species that were the most common. And as I said, with the globalization and the focus on 3 crops that were after expanded to 4, it was wheat, rice, and maize, and then potato was added later on. Now what we need to do, it's an opportunity for us, an opportunity to bring the fonio, to bring the millet, to bring the teff, to bring the manioc, and so many other species back, and to use the local material, use the local knowledge, and combine it with the frontier science, like gene editing, like omics, like different ways of analyzing it to make sure that we breed varieties that are better to every context this time, not bring in and copy paste, but rather do it within the ecosystem, within the country, and we need to scale it up. We need to make sure that the farmers understand what's best in these new varieties of fonio for them, but also not only we do the production side, we need to go into the processing as well. And because in the processing, you have opportunities of employability for our youth. And you know, in Africa, we are the youngest population, and we have the largest percentage of young people in Africa. But also, there is a better return on investment. So that's where creating wealth related to agri-food system is very important. So the processing, it's very important as the input is important. I didn't talk about the input, but that's another area where we have an opportunity of industrialization and of bringing youth to agriculture. And with that, we need also to make sure that we create the right market for it. So the right market is both local market and global market and regional market. We tend to think more globally than nationally or locally, but I think the local market is a great opportunity. And with the local market, the way we do it is through the right policies. So, for example, if we want to create a demand for fonio or for millet, and that's another story in Senegal where millet used to be a very, very known grains that everybody eats. Today you go in Senegal, millet is too expensive for the layman, and it's only for the rich people that can really afford to buy millet because it's too expensive. So going back to creating the market, you create the market by getting the right price, but to get to the right price and the demand, you need policy. So the policy could be support for the fonio, support for the teff, support for the manioc. And this we have seen it. Like, for example, Kenya got a policy whereby all the maize flour has to have 30% millet. And the policy was put in place for two reasons. It was put in place to kind of buffer the prices of maize, as sometimes it goes up and gets out of the reach of the normal people, but also to increase the nutrition in it. So it's both nutrition and price control from the government to make sure that we have nutritious flour on the table of everybody, and also to make sure that we don't leave the price going really very much fluctuating up and messing up the life of people. So there is a huge component on the policy side to create market and to encourage those species, be it grains or vegetables or animals or fish, to come back to the market. And we need it because going forward, particularly with climate change, with water issues, scarcity issues in Africa, we need definitely to be better prepared for the 1.5 degree or the 2 degrees in the continent.
Speaking of I will follow up on some of what you talk about. Youth unemployment, women, smallholder farmer, which also relate to gender inequality, economic issues on the continent. As a woman from Morocco, example, and being in this position and using this platform to revolutionize agriculture globally. Talk to me about what informed you. What lesson from your time in Morocco growing up that informs some of what you do right now at the agency?
So I was born and raised in Morocco. So I would say all of my life in Morocco was all a lot of lessons from the countryside, lessons from the university, lessons from growing up with my peers. During my time at the university, which is Institut Agronomique et Vétérinaire Hassan II, the Institute of Ag and Vet School in Morocco, we used to spend at least 1 month a year with the farmers. And with that, I had really the chance to get to know farmers that produce root beet, and farmers that produce milk and dairy, and farmers that produce alfalfa and feeding. So that really was very, very informative. I learned a lot from living with the farmers and getting to understand how they think and see how they are very, very wise people that really doesn't get swept away with an idea, because they have been surviving for years and years with this climate. So they know very well how to really minimize the risk in terms of dealing with their livelihood and with their production system. My experience as well by visiting many, many African countries is that really the diversity of ecosystem require us to have diversified agri-food systems as well. And that maybe we did not invest enough in science, technology, and innovation. And the number says that in most of the African country, we have about 34 cents for every $100 that is really spent in the agri-food system. So it's 0.34%, very, very little. Whereas the global target is about 3%. And many of the countries worldwide are spending, like Germany, for example, in the US and China, they're spending about 2 to 2.5%. So definitely the lack of investment in science, technology, and innovation and in research haven't allowed us really to bring more innovation to our farmers. And our farmers today our farmers needs it always, but today they need it more because of the pressure on them to produce more with less resources, and the pressure with them to adapt to this variability in the climate. So we think for us as urban people living in the urban setting, it's not a big deal. For the farmers that is waiting the rain to really initiate the cycle for them, or to come at the time where there is the grain filling, it's really very doubting times when in the old days there was a high certainty that the rain gonna come in this time and this time. Right now it's completely changing. And to alleviate that, to help them, we need to bring them really technology and innovation and make it accessible, make it in their hand, so that they have a better life and better livelihood, and have a better nutrition for their kids as well. That component of the nutrition is extremely important for Africa. So the nutrition food and the healthy diet for them, it's very important, so that the kids of today are really our future leaders of tomorrow, and they are developed at their full potential, not being undermined by the nutrition during their first 1,000 days or their first 5,000 days. So definitely in Africa, we need more technology. And one of the barriers of technology right now in Africa is the cost. It's not accessible to most of the farmers. You talk about fertilizers, it's too costly for them. You talk about irrigation technologies, again, it's too costly. You talk about mechanization. So we need to look how could we bring that input side, as we talked about the processing, how could we make sure that in Africa we are manufacturing the required machinery that works with the small scale farmers. In Africa, we are producing the right fertilizer that are based on data of the soil component and the soil composition. In Africa, we have the varieties that are the best for this ecosystem, and it's produced in Africa, so that the cost comes down. Most of the things that come imported are very, very expensive, and until we bring that innovation to be accessible for the small farmers in Africa, we won't have the scalability that we need to increase productivity in Africa, and to have Africa to be food secure and nutrition secure.
So what you're saying is Africans and African government especially, and the private sector, need to change their mindset on how they think about agriculture.
Absolutely. There should be a shift in our mindset from global to local market, from copying from the West to doing it ourselves, from maybe subsidizing sugar instead of sugar, subsidizing those millet and that fonio and those neglected underutilized species that are better for our ecosystem, and also working more with the youth, working more with the women and the girls, and helping really bringing together the education with the agriculture, with the health component together in our policies. So our policies have to be more coherent, so that we support women and girls, that we support people in the rural area in terms of access to knowledge, in terms of education, and access to innovation and technology in their farming systems and in their farms.
So Africa can feed not just African, they can feed the world.
Absolutely, no doubt about it.
Yeah. I guess my other question to you, speaking of agriculture and the climate summit where we are today, there is a lot of announcements that have been made today. And yesterday, we had the former Vice President Al Gore that spoke about innovative solution for soil, for climate, for farming, for example. And today, Bayer also made an announcement. The Biden-Harris administration, the vice president was just in Africa, and she announced $8 billion for climate adaptation in Africa. There's a huge opportunity for the private sector, foreign, both domestic and foreign, in Africa. Talk about some of those. I know the UN has a climate agency that works with businesses. Are you working? Can you talk about how you're working with those companies and agencies to bring more innovation and more support, as some of what you talk about?
So definitely, as FAO, we work with different other UN organizations, with different government, and with the private sector. So definitely in terms of financing international development in Africa, we need the private sector. But we need to come up with that the finance has to fit the priorities of the country. And that's really what we are working on as FAO. We are providing know-how, policy support, technical support, capacity building, but we are also helping the countries to develop their own agenda, whereby the country has to define in which commodities they want to invest, with which companies, and so on and so forth. And we are providing the data behind, and we are providing also, as I said, the policy support. So in Africa, that one of the issues that maybe have limited us, it's really the global markets, and that's where the free trade agreement within Africa is very important. Now we have
the African Continental Free Trade Agreement.
We need to activate it much more. We need to activate it, and that activation comes also from negotiation, but also consultation at the regional and the local level on how could we produce different things and how could we use that free trade agreement to provide opportunities for trade from within the continent. And that also will help us a lot, will help us shift the mentality from the global market to the local and the regional market. It's going to help us as well to find more synergies between countries, whereby I might be providing something that works well in my ecosystem as country A for country B, and vice versa, country B gets something else that works well within the ecosystem. So private sector is very much needed, and I always say the farmer is a private sector. If you think the farmer is a public servant, no, they're not a public servant. There are people that are on their own in many ways that produce and sell. So they are a private sector. But we tend to think about mega and multinational when we think about private sector. What Africa needs, it's small and medium enterprise. It's one, consider that farmer as a private sector because he or she is a private sector, and work with him and her on that capacity, and also nurture more small, more medium enterprises and provide them with the tools and the means to really succeed. I'll give you an example on irrigation technologies. Africa has only about 7% irrigated land. Asia has about 58% irrigated. So the potential of irrigation in Africa is huge. Right now, most of the farmer has one crop a year. You go to India, farmers have 3 crops a year. So there is a lot of things that we need to help the farmers if we want them to increase their productivity, increase their incomes, have a better life. We need to help them with those technologies. So how do you bring irrigation to Africa? If you keep importing irrigation material from Europe, it's going to be always too costly. So what you need to do is build the industrialization and the irrigation companies and manufacturing in Africa. So you create the manufacturing component, maybe in collaboration with the private sector from outside or inside, and you create so many SMEs in terms of maintenance, in terms of resale, there's so many things to be done. And with that, we are really hitting two birds. So A, we are bringing technologies and providing the farmer the potential to maybe move to 2 crops per year or 3 crops per year as the Asian has, and we are reducing the water footprint. There is a huge difference between precision irrigation and no irrigation or flood irrigation. So you are doing both climate action, but in the same time you are providing the farmers with an opportunity to produce more and have more money and more income to improve their life and livelihood. So there's a lot of entry points, but in all those entry points, you need investment in private sector, but particularly small and medium enterprises that are local. You need policy, and you need really that freedom of movement within the continent to help our countries really to sell to each other and to make them really focus on trading between them instead of having all the trade it's either overseas or coming from overseas.
Before we started the interview, we were talking a little bit about some of the plants that you are preserving, indigenous plants. Some of them are local, are domestic to Africa, like haga, babul, that is found in South Africa, and using a lot of, and shea also. They're using a lot of production, food production and cosmetic around the world. Can you talk about what you're doing as a scientist to preserve those indigenous plants, not just in Africa, around the world?
So indigenous plants and indigenous knowledge at large, it's wonderful wealth that maybe we haven't been really tapping into enough. And again, it's the economy of scale that got them completely disappearing. And maybe that economy of scale, it's part and parcel of the globalization. And that's where we have to rethink our globalization and our trade and the movement of goods around the world. So going back to those native species, indigenous species, and knowing how to use them could bring us, again, not only nutritious food, but also very healthy food, and maybe also an opportunity for incomes for the farmers that are producing them. So there are a number of gene banks that have been conserving the seeds and the material, and there's also a lot of local gene banks that have been conserving them. But what we need to do now is bring them out. It's bringing them to the local market, to the regional market, to the global market. And there what we are really saying is with the new science, with the new technologies, it's going to be cheaper for us to breed them today, to use them today than 50 years ago. So today we could do it. It's good for everybody. It's good for the planet. It's good for human nutrition. It's good for the economy. It's good for employment, as we mentioned before. So it is really not a silver bullet, but it's one intervention that could help in many fronts.
Are we yield multiple returns?
Exactly, with multiple returns and multiple wins. So we need, and that knowledge, only the local institution has it, only the indigenous people have it. So we need to bring them on board. We need really to listen to them, work with them, provide them with the need, and that's where FAO comes really very handy. We stand ready to help in terms, as I said, in terms of capacity, in terms of technical advisory services, policy advisory services, access to knowledge. So it's a win-win, but we need to do it with local communities. We can't do it outside the local communities because the knowledge is with them, and the return on investment should be for them as well.
So I'm going to end this interview as an African. Morocco, where you're from, is known for so many things, for the beauty of the country, for the food. Talk to us about your memory with food.
Oh my God, yeah. So as everybody, the best food, it's mama food, always. And as you know, the Moroccan cuisine, it's a very, very diverse and healthy food. So when people talk about eating more vegetables than meat, that was how I grew up. So in Morocco, we grew up where we have always, in the lunchtime, for example, a tagine. The tagine, it's always with a small piece of meat in the middle and a lot of vegetables around it. And we all eat vegetables, and my dad, or the head of the family, or my mom, if my dad is not around, normally it's him, it's his role, he takes a piece of meat for each one of us. So it's really a diet that was based on salads and veggies, and meat was always a small piece. And I think this is a very healthy diet. That's what we need today. And if I remember our meals, the meals were always in group. It's never me and my mom alone. It's never me or my dad alone. It's the whole family. So it's part and parcel of the culture. Food was time to get together, was time to enjoy each other's company, and it was very, very healthy, sincerely. If I remember other things, I think Morocco used to be much more environmental conscious than today. We used to have a lot of circular economy without calling it circular economy, whereby there was a person that passed from house to house to take the dried bread, for example. And that dried bread makes it to factories for biscuits and other things. Whereby in Ramadan time, as a Muslim, for example, before iftar time, before the sunset, people that need help pass from house to house, and we have always the harira, and instead of giving them food, you give them money, you give them food. So the person gets a harira that is mixed from different families. So going back, my childhood was very much peace and love, and very much close to nature. We weren't really using too much product in general, and there was a lot of recycling as part and parcel of what we do. We didn't think about it. It didn't have a name. It didn't have an advocacy for it, but it was style of life. Now it's completely different. Now it's going back to be very individualist, and to do recycling because you are asked to do it, not so much as part of your life style of life. So I think we have lost a little bit that conviviality, that community sense, and that self-reliance on you, your family, and the community around you. Other things, there are many fruit that I never saw in Morocco before. I'm talking about avocado. I never saw an avocado before. A mango? No. All of these I got to know much later. So there was very much, we eat what's in the season. So the season, it's a season of potato and turnip or carrots. That's what you eat. And then the other season you got apricot and peach. That's what you got. So it was a much more local market, local production than it is right now. So there is that change of life, of style of our life has come to on a cost. Maybe we have everything now in the supermarket, but in terms of environmental footprint, I don't think it's the best. In terms of quality, like taste, I mean, the food I grew up with was much more tastier than the one I see now, unless I am in Uzbekistan and they take the watermelon of Uzbekistan, which is one of the best in the world, or figs. So it's now when you go to the country and it's produced and maybe it's a local variety or a local species, then you find that taste. So I think we have lost in terms of taste, we have lost in terms of nutrition a lot, but we have gained in terms of options, because the option comes from across the world. So I think an analysis of our life of style and footprint would be interesting. I have the feeling it was far better when I was a child in Elouafi, which is the small town when I was born and raised as a child.
I see the passion and the love as you talk about those memories growing up in Morocco. Which brings me to my last question. I can't live without you talking about the importance of STEM education for women, especially in Africa.
So STEM, it's a great area that attracts a lot of girls in general. So what we need is just to get them to understand it and to like it. So once a girl in general get to know biology particularly, you find them very, very interested in engineering, mathematics. So I think STEM is very important. As we said, what we are today in the best time to innovate. We are in the best time to really use science, technology, and innovation for a better future for all. And because of that, we need more STEM in Africa. We need more investment in STEM, and we need more investment in education in general, and particularly for girls. So if we are able to put a system, an educative system, that will encourage more girls to go in STEM, I see it as, a triple win, a multi-win agenda, whereby you get more innovative ideas, you get more engagement of girls and women in science, and hopefully, definitely this will come to more innovation that they are context-specific, that are fit for purpose for the different and the marvelous ecosystem we have in Africa.
What will you tell your younger self?
I'm pushing my two daughters to really go into science because I love it, and I hope they're gonna listen to their mama and go to science.
Okay. Thank you so much for talking with us, and we wish you the best with what you're doing, and very, very proud of you as a fellow African.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.